There was a time when you had a quiet idea of who you might become. Not perfect, not famous, not extraordinary. Just someone who felt more like you. Maybe you imagined a life that felt honest, a life that felt intentional. You thought you would choose your own path, but somewhere along the way, things changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone else. It happened slowly. One decision that made sense at the time. One compromise that felt harmless. One moment when staying quiet felt easier than saying what you really meant. And then another, and another, until one day, you look at your life and feel something strange. Nothing is technically wrong. You have responsibilities. You have routines. You have a version of stability. From the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, something feels unfamiliar. Like you're living inside a life that belongs to someone else. You still recognize your name, your face, your voice. But the person behind them feels slightly distant. Not gone, just further away than before. And the unsettling part is this: you didn't rebel against your life. You didn't destroy it. You adapted to it. You adjusted. You became practical, responsible, efficient. Little by little, you became the kind of person the world rewards. Reliable, predictable, reasonable. But somewhere in that process, the person you once imagined becoming quietly faded into the background. And now, without any clear moment of when it happened, you sometimes catch yourself wondering something unsettling. When did I become someone I never meant to be? What's strange about this realization is that nothing obviously went wrong. There was no dramatic collapse, no moment where everything fell apart. In fact, if someone asked you about your life, you might even say it's going reasonably well. You're functioning. You show up, you do what needs to be done. You handle responsibilities. You keep things moving. From the outside, it looks like maturity, growth, progress. But inside, something feels quietly misaligned, like you're slightly out of sync with your own life. And the confusing part is this: you can't point to a single moment where things changed. There was no clear turning point, no decision that said, from now on, I'll stop being myself. Instead, it happened through small adjustments, practical choices, reasonable compromises, the kind of decisions that adults make every single day. Choosing stability over curiosity, choosing approval over honesty, choosing what works over what feels true. None of these choices seemed dangerous. In fact, they probably felt responsible. And that's what makes this so difficult to notice, because the process that slowly changed you didn't look like failure. It looked like success. You became more dependable, more efficient, more predictable. You learned how to navigate expectations, how to avoid unnecessary conflict, how to do what's required. And over time, these skills start shaping you, not in loud ways, but in quiet, almost invisible ways. Until one day, you realize something unsettling. You didn't become someone else overnight. You slowly adapted yourself to the life around you. And somewhere in that process, parts of you became quieter. Certain instincts stopped speaking up. Certain dreams stopped appearing. Not because they disappeared completely, but because the life you built no longer had space for them. And when that happens long enough, a strange question begins to surface. Not a dramatic one, a quiet one. The kind of question that appears late at night, when everything is finally still. A question that sounds something like this: did I actually choose this life? Or did I slowly adjust to it until it became mine? There is a strange kind of change that doesn't look like change at all. It doesn't arrive with chaos. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand your attention. Instead, it moves quietly, almost politely. So quietly, in fact, that most people don't notice it happening. Not at first, because this kind of change doesn't begin with losing everything. It begins with adjusting, adapting, fitting in, learning how things work. You enter environments that already have expectations, workplaces, social circles, cultural norms, unspoken rules about what is considered successful, acceptable, respectable. And at first, adapting to these things feels harmless, even necessary. You tell yourself, this is just part of growing up. You learn when to speak, when to stay quiet, what opinions are welcomed, which parts of your personality make people uncomfortable. So you soften those parts. You round the edges. You make yourself easier to understand, easier to accept, easier to fit into the spaces you occupy. And none of this feels like losing yourself. It feels like becoming better, more mature, more socially intelligent, more capable of navigating the world. But something subtle begins to happen, something so gradual that it rarely triggers alarm. The person you are starts becoming shaped by the environments you must survive in. And little by little, you start prioritizing what works over what feels true. At work, you learn that being agreeable gets you further than being honest. So you become agreeable. In relationships, you learn that expressing certain emotions creates tension. So you hold those emotions back. In social settings, you notice that certain dreams sound unrealistic. So eventually, you stop talking about them. None of these moments feel dramatic. They feel practical, responsible, normal. But each small adjustment moves you slightly further away from the person you once imagined becoming. Not all at once, just a few degrees at a time. And that's how the drift begins. Not with rebellion, not with crisis, but with alignment. Alignment with systems, expectations, structures. And slowly, your inner life starts rearranging itself to make those systems easier to live inside. You become efficient, productive, dependable. You know how to respond. You know how to behave. You know what version of yourself works best in different environments. And from the outside, this looks like success. People trust you. People rely on you. People describe you as responsible. But the strange thing about this version of success is that it often comes with a quiet cost. Because the more skilled you become at navigating expectations, the easier it becomes to lose contact with your own direction. Not because you're weak, not because you gave up, but because constant adaptation changes how you relate to yourself. Think about how often modern life rewards speed, fast responses, quick decisions, constant productivity, the ability to move from task to task without hesitation. In that kind of environment, reflection becomes rare, stillness becomes uncomfortable, and asking deeper questions about your life starts to feel inefficient. So, you keep moving. You wake up, you work, you respond, you solve problems, you handle responsibilities. You scroll, you distract yourself, you sleep, then you wake up again and repeat the pattern. Day after day, week after week, year after year, until something subtle begins to happen. The distance between who you are and who you once imagined becoming slowly grows. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a road that gradually curves without you realizing it. And then sometimes, a small moment interrupts the routine. Maybe you're driving home late at night. The road is quiet. The city lights blur past the window. And for a brief moment, you feel something you haven't felt in a long time. A strange mixture of curiosity and discomfort. You begin to wonder, is this really the life I intended to build? Not because the life is bad, but because it feels unexpected, different from what you once imagined. And that's when another realization quietly appears. The person you are today was not created in one decision. They were created in thousands of small adjustments, small compromises, small moments of choosing stability over uncertainty, small decisions to do what makes sense instead of what feels alive. And again, none of these decisions were wrong. They were understandable, logical, responsible. But taken together, over long periods of time, they slowly shaped a version of you that feels unfamiliar. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is that modern life quietly encourages this process. It rewards reliability, predictability, efficiency, the ability to function well within existing structures. But it rarely rewards something much harder: the courage to pause, to question direction, to admit that the path you are on might not actually belong to you. Because questioning your life can feel disruptive, inconvenient, even irresponsible. So most people don't do it. They keep adapting, keep adjusting, keep becoming the person their circumstances require. And eventually, that version of themselves starts to feel permanent. But deep down, there is often a quiet awareness, a subtle memory of another version of you. Not necessarily a better version, just a more honest one. A version that existed before the layers of expectation, before the careful adjustments, before the long process of becoming who the world needed you to be. And sometimes, late at night, or during moments of unexpected stillness, that old question returns, not loudly, just quietly enough to make you uncomfortable. The question that many people carry but rarely say out loud. A question that sounds something like this: if I had paused earlier, if I had questioned the direction sooner, would I still have become this version of myself? Or would I have become someone completely different? At this point, a difficult question begins to appear. If so many people end up feeling this way, if so many people quietly sense that they've drifted away from themselves, then maybe this isn't just a personal problem. Maybe something about the way we live now makes this kind of drift almost inevitable. Because modern life has a very particular rhythm, a rhythm built around speed, efficiency, constant movement. From the moment you wake up, your attention is already being pulled in different directions. Notifications, messages, deadlines, responsibilities, news, information. Your mind rarely gets a moment to sit quietly with itself. And at first, this doesn't feel dangerous. It feels productive. It feels like staying connected. It feels like being engaged with the world. But there is a hidden effect that slowly begins to take shape. When your attention is constantly occupied, you lose the space required to hear yourself clearly. And without that space, something important begins to fade. Your inner direction. Think about how rarely modern life allows for silence. Not just physical silence, but psychological silence. Moments where nothing is demanding your attention. Moments where your mind is not reacting to something outside of you. Those moments used to exist naturally. Long walks, quiet evenings, unstructured time, boredom. But modern life has learned to eliminate boredom. Every empty moment can now be filled instantly with a screen, with information, with distraction. And while that might seem harmless, it slowly changes how you experience yourself. Because when silence disappears, self-reflection disappears with it. And without reflection, your life slowly becomes reactive. You respond to demands. You manage responsibilities. You solve problems. But you rarely pause long enough to ask deeper questions. Questions like, is this direction still mine? Is this pace sustainable? Is this version of success actually meaningful to me? Instead, you keep moving. And the longer you move without questioning direction, the harder it becomes to notice the drift. There is another force at work as well, one that modern life amplifies constantly. Comparison. Every day you are exposed to thousands of lives, carefully edited moments of success, achievement, confidence, certainty. And even when you know that these images are incomplete, they still influence you. They quietly shape your sense of what matters, what success looks like, what progress should feel like. So you adjust. You measure yourself against standards that were never truly yours. You begin pursuing goals that once belonged to someone else. And because these goals are socially rewarded, they begin to feel correct. But something subtle happens when you build your life around external validation. Your internal compass becomes quieter. Not gone, just harder to hear. Because when approval becomes the measure of progress, self-understanding becomes less necessary. You only need to know how to meet expectations. And expectations are everywhere. In careers, in relationships, in the way success is defined, in the way adulthood is supposed to look. A stable job, predictable progress, clear milestones. And again, none of these expectations are inherently wrong. They can provide structure, security, opportunity, but they also carry a quiet danger. When expectations become the map for your life, you may stop asking whether the map actually belongs to you. You follow it because it works, because it's familiar, because everyone else seems to be following it too. And that is how identity drift often happens in modern life. Not through failure, but through constant alignment with systems that were never designed around your inner life. Systems designed for productivity, for stability, for efficiency, but not necessarily for meaning. Meaning requires something slower, something less predictable. Meaning requires curiosity, experimentation, even confusion. But confusion is uncomfortable, and modern life trains us to eliminate discomfort quickly, to solve it, to move past it, to return to productivity. So instead of exploring the questions that feel unsettling, most people push them aside. They tell themselves they will think about these things later, when life slows down, when responsibilities are lighter, when the timing feels better. But later rarely arrives, because the systems around you are designed to keep moving. And when life keeps moving, drift continues. Not dramatically, not destructively, just quietly, until the gap between who you are and who you once imagined becoming starts to feel noticeable. And in that moment, many people assume something is wrong with them. They believe they failed to stay true to themselves. But perhaps the deeper truth is this: modern life doesn't simply distract you. It trains you. It trains your attention. It trains your priorities. It trains the way you define success. And so, almost invisibly, it trains you to become someone who can function extremely well inside systems that were never designed to help you understand yourself, which leads to a realization that can feel both uncomfortable and strangely relieving. Maybe the reason you feel disconnected from yourself isn't because you lost your way. Maybe it's because the world around you is constantly teaching you to look everywhere except inward. And when that happens long enough, the voice that once guided you doesn't disappear. It simply becomes quiet, waiting for the rare moment when life finally slows down enough for you to hear it again. At some point, when people begin to notice this distance within themselves, their first reaction is often blame. They assume something must be wrong with them. Maybe they weren't disciplined enough. Maybe they lacked clarity. Maybe they simply lost their way. But the truth is often much more complicated than that. Because becoming someone you never meant to be doesn't usually happen through weakness. It happens through adaptation, through trying to survive inside systems that demand constant adjustment. You learned how to meet expectations. You learned how to stay responsible. You learned how to keep things stable. And those are not failures. Those are skills. They are the skills that allow people to function in a complex and demanding world. But functioning well in the world and feeling connected to yourself are not always the same thing. Sometimes the very qualities that help you succeed externally create distance internally. Being dependable can mean suppressing certain instincts. Being efficient can mean moving too quickly to notice what matters. Being adaptable can mean changing yourself until you no longer remember what your original direction was. And none of this makes you broken. In fact, it makes you human. Every generation adapts to the conditions it is born into. And the conditions of modern life are unlike anything humans experienced before. Constant stimulation, constant comparison, constant pressure to perform. Under those conditions, drifting away from yourself is not unusual. It is almost predictable, which means something important. If you sometimes feel like you became someone you never intended to be, that feeling is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of awareness. Because many people move through their entire lives without ever noticing the drift. They continue functioning, continuing adapting, continuing performing the roles their environment expects, and they never pause long enough to ask the uncomfortable questions. But the moment you begin to notice the distance, something subtle changes. Awareness returns, and awareness is powerful. Not because it instantly fixes everything, but because it interrupts the autopilot. For the first time in a long time, you begin to observe your life instead of simply moving through it. You begin to notice the habits, the patterns, the directions that once felt automatic. And in that observation, something quiet begins to return. Not certainty, not immediate answers, but a small space between who you are now and the systems that shaped you. And inside that space, a possibility begins to exist again. The possibility that the person you once imagined becoming was never completely lost, only buried under years of adaptation, waiting for a moment of honesty to be noticed again. Once people begin to notice this distance within themselves, a natural fear often follows. They wonder if it's already too late. Too many years have passed. Too many decisions have been made. Too many responsibilities now exist to change direction. Life has momentum. Careers, families, commitments, expectations. And when life builds enough momentum, it can start to feel irreversible, as if the person you once imagined becoming belongs to a different version of your life. A younger version, a freer version, a version that had more time to choose. But something important is often misunderstood here. Becoming someone you never meant to be doesn't mean the person you once were completely disappeared. It simply means your attention moved somewhere else, toward responsibilities, toward expectations, toward surviving the pace of the world around you. And when attention moves away from something for long enough, it begins to feel distant, not gone, just quiet. Think about how many parts of yourself exist quietly in the background of your life. Interests you once cared deeply about, ideas that once excited you, ways of thinking that once felt natural. They didn't vanish. They were simply replaced by more urgent demands. The mind adapts to what it must prioritize. And modern life is very good at creating priorities. Deadlines, bills, performance, productivity, all of these things demand attention. So naturally, your attention goes there. But attention is powerful. Where attention goes, identity slowly follows. If your attention spends years focused only on functioning, you become someone who functions. If your attention spends years focused only on performance, you become someone who performs. And eventually, those roles begin to feel like your identity. But roles are not the same as self. Roles are something you inhabit. The self is something you experience. And sometimes the quiet discomfort people feel in their lives is simply the tension between those two things, the role they perform and the self they rarely have time to notice. That tension doesn't mean your life is wrong. It simply means your attention has been heavily directed for a very long time. Directed by systems, directed by expectations, directed by environments that needed certain versions of you. But awareness changes something. Because once you see the process, you can no longer fully disappear inside it. You begin noticing the moments when your life is running on autopilot. The routines, the reactions, the ways your environment subtly tells you who you should be. And when you notice those things, even briefly, a small amount of space returns. Space between stimulus and response. Space between expectation and choice. That space is quiet, almost invisible. But it is incredibly important because identity is not something you permanently lose. Identity is something that becomes clearer when attention returns to it. And attention can return in very small ways. Not dramatic life changes, not sudden reinventions, just moments of honesty. Moments where you pause long enough to ask yourself questions that modern life rarely asks. Questions like, well, what parts of myself have been quiet for too long? What parts of my life feel automatic rather than intentional? What directions have I been following simply because they were expected? These questions don't immediately change your life, but they do something else. They interrupt the drift. They remind you that the person you are becoming is still being shaped, even now, even after years of adaptation. And once you realize that, the story becomes less frightening. Because the realization is no longer, I became someone I never meant to be. The realization becomes something else, something quieter, something more hopeful. You are still becoming someone, and the direction of that becoming is never as fixed as it first appears. There is a quiet moment that happens in many people's lives. It doesn't arrive with drama. It doesn't demand your attention. In fact, it often appears during very ordinary moments. Driving home after work, sitting alone late at night, looking at your reflection in a mirror you've passed thousands of times before. And suddenly, a simple thought appears, a thought that feels strangely unfamiliar. You look at your life and realize something subtle. You have been moving forward for years, working, building, adapting, doing everything that responsible people are supposed to do. And yet, somewhere inside that movement, a quiet question appears. Not about success, not about achievement, but about identity. A question that sounds like this: how did I end up becoming this version of myself? Not in a tragic way, just in a curious one. Because when you were younger, you imagined becoming someone. You had certain instincts, certain curiosities, certain ways of seeing the world. But life moved quickly. Responsibilities appeared. Expectations grew. And over time, you became someone who could handle those expectations well. Someone capable, reliable, functional. And there's nothing wrong with that. In many ways, that version of you deserves respect because it carried you through complex years. It helped you survive. It helped you build stability. But sometimes, the version of yourself that helped you survive is not the same version of yourself that helps you feel alive. And noticing that difference is not a failure. It is awareness. Awareness of the quiet process that shapes every human life. The process of adapting to the world around us. Most people never stop long enough to notice that process happening. They simply keep moving, keep adjusting, keep becoming the person their environment requires. But the moment you notice the drift, something changes. You are no longer completely inside it. You become aware of the direction. And awareness always creates possibility. Not instant transformation, not dramatic reinvention, just possibility. The possibility that the person you once imagined becoming is not as far away as it sometimes feels. Because the truth is, you never truly stopped becoming that person. You simply spent many years becoming other things first. And perhaps the most unsettling realization in adulthood is not that life is difficult. It's realizing how easily a person can slowly become someone they never meant to be. But the moment you see that process clearly, another realization quietly follows. If a life can slowly drift in one direction, it can also slowly drift in another.